This isn't a story about a cursed artifact or a hidden treasure. It's about how a seemingly innocuous object, a simple family heirloom, can peel back the curtain on a horrifying truth, a tragedy buried under layers of time. Listen closely, because every word I'm about to tell you isn't fiction. It's a true story about a girl named Elara and a secret that has haunted her family for generations. Elara was nothing out of the ordinary. She lived in a quiet suburban house on the outskirts of Kansas, a place where people often say nothing surprising ever happens. Her life was a canvas of ordinary colors. Working, walking her golden retriever named Max, and visiting her grandfather, Arthur, the only family she had left. Her parents had passed away in a car accident years ago, and since then, Arthur had been Elara's only rock. He was a man of few words with sad, blue eyes. He spent most of his time sitting silently in his old armchair, gazing at faded family photos. When Arthur passed away, Elara felt her entire world collapse. Although he had always kept a certain distance, his presence was a solid anchor. The funeral was a quiet affair. Afterward, Elara began to clean out his house. She found things that seemed worthless but held so many memories. Old books Arthur used to read to her, scratched vinyl records, and a gold pocket watch. It was the watch he always carried. She remembered as a child, she had often asked to see it, but he would just shake his head, saying it was nothing special. The vintage watch, with its worn gold casing and yellowed glass, was unremarkable. The hands had stopped long ago. Elara decided to take it to an antique watch repair shop to have it restored. The watchmaker, a kind old man named Silas, held the watch and looked at it contemplatively. He flipped it over, stroking the casing. "There's an inscription here," he said softly, "but it's too faint. It needs to be cleaned to be seen." Elara's heart pounded. She didn't remember ever seeing any engraving on it. Maybe it was just a simple message, a loving note her grandfather had inscribed. Silas began his work. A little later he called Elara back. His eyes were filled with surprise and a hint of confusion. "Miss Elara," he said, his voice lowering, "this is not a simple inscription." He handed the watch to her. She looked at it. Beneath the polished gold casing, a small, intricate line of text was revealed. "The truth is in the water." A shiver ran down Elara's spine. The truth is in the water? This was an odd phrase, unlike anything she knew about her grandfather. Arthur was a private man, and this message had an unsettling mystery to it. She started to think, trying to connect it to anything. She remembered that her grandfather was terrified of water. As a child, she wanted him to teach her to swim, but he would just shake his head and wouldn't even go near the pool. As she grew up, every time she went swimming, he would be visibly anxious. She had never understood that fear. Now, with this engraving, his fear suddenly took on a profound meaning. It wasn't a normal fear. It was a haunting. And here's the scariest part. A few days before her grandfather passed away, he had called Elara to him and said something she couldn't forget. "Elara, you must remember that not everything we see is the truth. There are secrets. They can lie in the most unexpected places." His words at the time sounded like those of a rambling old man, but now they echoed in her mind with a completely new meaning. She began to suspect that there was a bigger story hidden, a story she knew nothing about. She returned home and stared at the watch, the small inscription seeming to dance before her eyes. "The truth is in the water." Water. Could it be a place, an event, or even a name? She rummaged through all the old family photos, hoping to find a clue. Most of the photos were very ordinary. Picnic trips, birthday parties. But then she stopped at a faded photo. It showed Arthur and her grandmother, Evelyn. They were standing next to a large lake, looking very happy. Behind them was a small wooden house. She had no idea about this house. Where was this photo taken? Could this be the first clue? Elara's hands trembled as she flipped the photo over. On the back, a small line of text was scribbled in pencil. "Summer of '68. Lakeside. Summer of '68. By the lake." At that time, her father, David, was just a little boy. Could this photo be related to the watch and the mysterious engraving? A cold feeling ran down her spine. From the phrase, "The truth is in the water," and the old, faded photo, a haunting obsession began to consume Elara. This obsession wasn't a harmless curiosity. It was a chilling sensation, as if an invisible hand was pulling her into an abyss she knew nothing about. She began to dig deep into the past, not just to find an answer, but to understand more about her grandfather, a man she thought she knew so well. Elara went back to Arthur's house, searching every corner. She found an old diary, carefully hidden at the bottom of a wooden chest. The diary was nothing special, just daily entries. But then she found a few torn pages. They had been ripped out violently, leaving behind tattered pieces of paper and jagged tears. What happened on those days? It was something he didn't want anyone to know. Another question arose, a more terrifying one. How deep did this secret run in her family? She began to search for information about the lake in the photo. The name Lakeside was too generic, but with the help of a few of her grandfather's old acquaintances, she was able to identify it as Lakeview, a small lake in the countryside a few hours' drive away. It was a remote, little-known area that had been all but forgotten over time. As she drove there, Elara felt a strange tension. A hazy fog covered the lake, and the air was cold like a warning. When she arrived, Elara saw an old wooden house, exactly as it was in the photo. It had been abandoned for a long time, the windows shattered, the walls rotting. There was no one there, just an eerie silence. She walked around the house, feeling that something was off. There was a small well behind the house, covered by a rotten wooden board. Next to the well, she found an old, rusty bucket. This strange and chilling feeling had taken root in her. An elderly neighbor, who had lived there all her life, saw Elara and approached her. She introduced herself and asked about the house. The old woman looked at her with suspicion, then sighed. "That house," she said, "is called the House of Lies." Elara's heart skipped a beat. "Lies?" she asked, her voice trembling. The old woman told a story, that in the summer of 1968, there was a tragic accident. A young girl, the daughter of a wealthy family there, had drowned in the lake. But the old woman's story was different from what Elara knew. The girl was said to have committed suicide, but the old woman said she never had any intention of doing so. She was a cheerful, vibrant person. The old woman said that someone had saved her, but then, this person had hidden and said nothing about the incident. The old woman didn't know the person's name but said he was a stranger. "People say he was hiding a terrible secret," the old woman said. "That the death wasn't an accident." The old woman's story sent shivers down Elara's spine. Could that person be my grandfather? She wondered. Another question, more horrible, popped into her head. If her grandfather knew the truth, why did he stay silent? And why did he engrave that mysterious phrase on the watch? That night, Elara returned to the house, carrying a flashlight. She decided to explore more. The house was old and rotting, but it still held some traces of the past. In a bedroom, she saw a few scraps of fabric and an old handbag. Inside the bag, she found a small wallet. And in the wallet, there was an old ID card with a photo of a young girl. Her name was Serafina Thorne. Was this the girl who had drowned? Elara began to search for more information about Serafina Thorne. She found old newspapers. A headline of a faded newspaper read, "Murder at Lakeview, young girl killed." Right next to it, another headline, "Captain Arthur Thorne, the girl's grieving father, vows to find the killer." Elara was startled. Thorne? Her grandfather was also named Arthur. Could it be just a coincidence? No, it was too much of a coincidence. She decided to investigate the Thorne family. She knew that her grandmother, Evelyn, also had a secret. She always avoided talking about her family, and Arthur rarely mentioned it either. Elara had always thought she was an orphan. But could this be a big lie? Could Evelyn be Serafina's sister? Could Serafina's death have been a planned accident? These questions kept Elara up at night. She began to doubt everything, everyone. She called an old acquaintance of her grandfather's, a retired private detective. At first, he refused to help, but when he heard the names Serafina Thorne and Lakeview, he changed his attitude. "I remember that case," he said, his voice lowering. It was closed, but not everyone believed it was a suicide. The case had many suspicious points. He told Elara about inconsistent reports, about traces that had been erased, and about a witness who had changed his testimony. That witness was a young man named David Thorne. Elara's father's name. Elara felt a chill. Her father. Could he be involved in this case? Her father had died when she was too young to ask him about the past. Now she had to find the answers herself. She realized that her family was not an ordinary one. It was a family full of horrifying secrets. Each piece of the puzzle Elara found didn't make the picture clearer. Instead, it made it more complicated and frightening. Her father's name, David, was linked to the Lakeview murder, along with the fact that her grandfather, Arthur, had a mysterious connection to the Thorne family. The truth is in the water wasn't just a message. It was a confession, a warning. Elara returned to the office of the retired private detective, a man named Silas. His name was the same as the watchmaker's, and perhaps this was no longer a coincidence. Elara began to suspect that a larger plan was at play. Silas was an old friend of Arthur's, and Elara vaguely realized that Arthur had trusted her to discover this secret. Arthur had left her clues, knowing she wouldn't stop until the truth was revealed. Silas, a retired man with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked at Elara with a worried expression. "Arthur asked me to watch over you," he said. "He was afraid that someone would find the truth before you and harm you." Elara was startled. "Who?" she asked. Silas shook his head. "I don't know. All I know is that a third person was involved in that murder." Silas showed Elara an old report on the case. He had carefully kept it for years. The report revealed something astonishing. Her father's testimony, David's, didn't match anyone else's. David had said he saw a stranger pass by the house and run away, but there were no traces of this person. David had said that Serafina was alone, but Silas found another witness, an old farmer nearby, who said he saw a black car parked near Serafina's house, and a man in a red jacket got out of the car. That man was hiding something in his hand. A shiver ran down Elara's spine. She remembered an old photo of her father. He was wearing a red jacket. She had always thought it was an ordinary jacket, but now it held a terrifying meaning. Could her father be involved in the case? Silas continued. He said that after the case, the Thorne family fell apart. Serafina's father, Arthur Thorne, spent his life searching for the killer, but he never found him. He became deranged and eventually died in a mental institution. Serafina's mother left and never came back. Their house was sold. The Thorne family's tragic story was buried by time. Elara returned to her grandfather's house, and she found a small wooden box hidden under the floorboards. In the box, she found an old letter. The letter was written by Arthur Thorne, Serafina's father. In the letter, Arthur Thorne wrote that he suspected his daughter had been killed by a man involved in another case, a case about a buried treasure. And he wrote that he believed a member of his own family was involved in this case. The letter had no name, but it said that the person was a woman who was married to a man named Arthur. This was Elara's grandfather. Elara started to feel sick. Everything was falling apart. She wasn't just finding a secret. She was finding a network of secrets and lies. She realized that her grandmother, Evelyn, might have married her grandfather to hide a secret. Could Evelyn have been the one who killed Serafina? Was Arthur an accomplice? Could her father, David, have known the truth and stayed silent to protect the family? A terrible thought occurred to Elara. She remembered the neighbor's words. Someone saved her. But then, this person hid and said nothing about the incident. She remembered the engraving on the watch. The truth is in the water. And she remembered a detail Silas had mentioned. There was a small well behind the house. Elara returned to the old house in Lakeview, carrying a rope and a flashlight. She decided to do something crazy, something she knew could be dangerous. She would go down the well. When she pulled the wooden board off, a foul smell rose up. The well was deep and dark, and she felt her heart pound. She began to descend the well. When she reached the bottom, she saw an old handbag. Inside the bag, she found a stack of faded documents. It was a will. The will was written by a lawyer, but it had no beneficiary's name, and it said that a large amount of the Thorne family's assets would be given to the daughter of a man named Arthur Thorne. But this wasn't Arthur, Seraphina's father. This was another man, and that daughter wasn't Seraphina. Elara felt her head spinning. She didn't understand anything. But then she flipped the document over and found a small photo attached. The photo showed a young man with sad, blue eyes. It was Arthur, her grandfather, and the young woman standing next to him with a face full of sorrow was not her grandmother. It was Seraphina. She realized a horrifying truth. Her grandfather, Arthur, was not her grandfather. He was just a friend of her grandmother's, who had adopted her as his granddaughter after her grandmother passed away. Her grandmother had a secret. She was Seraphina's sister, and Seraphina's death was not a murder, but a suicide. The more she discovered, the darker and more painful the truth became. Elara had found the final pieces of the puzzle, but they painted a completely different picture, one of sacrifice, lies, and a love that had died. The documents from the well revealed the truth. Seraphina Thorne was not murdered. She had committed suicide, throwing herself into the lake after discovering a terrible secret. She was pregnant by a married man, and that man had refused to acknowledge the child. He was a powerful man with political and social influence. Seraphina had felt desperate, and in that desperation, she had thrown herself into the lake. But who was that man? Elara felt her heart pound. She remembered the photo of her grandfather, Arthur, and the woman who died in the lake, Seraphina. She remembered the name David Thorne, her father. She realized that David Thorne was not her grandfather's son. He was the abandoned son of the Thorne family, who had to live a different life to hide that secret. David had loved Seraphina, and they had a child. A ring. That was the final clue. In the documents, Elara found a gold ring, with an inscription inside, "For our beautiful daughter, Evelyn." Elara was stunned. She had always thought that Evelyn was her grandmother's name, but this was her mother's name. Her mother was the daughter of Seraphina and David. Her grandfather, Arthur, had found the ring and the documents when he was trying to save Seraphina. He had pulled her ashore, but she was already dead. He had kept the secret to protect David and to protect their child. He had taken her mother, Evelyn, in as his granddaughter and then raised her. He had stayed silent to protect his family, and he had engraved the phrase on the watch as a confession, a reminder of a secret he had carried his whole life. And now Elara understood everything. The truth is in the water wasn't a secret about a murder. It was a confession about a family tragedy. The watch wasn't just a keepsake. It was a reminder of a tragic story that had been buried. Elara returned home, and she felt a sense of relief. She had found the truth, a painful but necessary truth. She had understood the secrets that had been kept, the silent sacrifices of her grandfather, and the complexity of love and loss. And here's the most astonishing part. A few days later, she received a letter. The letter was sent by a distant relative of her mother's. This person had known about the story. He said that her grandfather, Arthur, had left her a special gift, a small wooden house by the lake, called the House of Lies. Elara decided to keep this house, not because it had material value, but because it was a reminder of a story that had been buried. She would turn that house into a place to honor the truth, and to remind her of the secrets that had been kept. And this is Elara's story, of an old watch and a secret that changed her life forever. She learned that life is not always simple, and secrets can be buried deep. This story might have ended, but we can continue to learn more about similar stories. If you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss any future videos. Maybe the next story will be about a secret you are carrying yourself. Who knows?